Hey, No I listeners. So, if you are on TikTok or Instagram, you're likely seeing videos about what is happening in Iran. And for some of our listeners who maybe aren't on those apps, the videos I'm talking about may not be what you're imagining. If you're seeing these videos or these reels, you're seeing World War III hashtags, you're seeing satirical get ready with me for war videos. You're seeing people joking about getting drafted. And as USA Today reported on those trends in an article, the article notes this kind of video today may make zero sense to an older person or even seem unfunny, but to young people, calm is found in the distraction. So that's what I want to talk about today. Obviously, there's a lot going on in the world. You've undoubtedly heard the news by now that the United States did strike nuclear facilities in Iran. And the young adults, Gen Z in particular, is responding in their typical style with kind of this offbeat, dark humor, which this generation often uses as a coping mechanism. And we'll get into some of the reasons why that's not surprising. But underneath all of that, there is a deeper layer of true fear and uncertainty and anxiety, which are already problems among young adults in America and probably are heightened right now for a lot of people with kind of some unknowns and instability going on around the world. So let's talk about it. I will just say I'm not going to get into the merits of the strike. I'm not going to talk about the politics of it. But if you're interested in some different perspectives on that, then I would recommend listening to Point of View Radio Talk Show. It's the organization where I work. In addition to hosting the No Why podcast, I'm also a co host for Point of View. And so this is something that is being discussed pretty much every day on the show right now because there's a new development every day. And if you want to hear some perspectives on why the U.S. did what it did, that I would point you to that, which you can find pointofview.net or on Facebook. But let's go back to how Gen Z in particular, and millennials too, some younger millennials, I think, fit into this category, is responding to this news of kind of some major military activity and unrest and upheaval in the Middle East. So we know that Gen Z uses dark and often absurd humor to cope with things, and this is not a surprise. Earlier this year in our Know Why God is Good series, I interviewed Dr. Tanita Maddox. I'm going to be referencing her interview a lot because it was amazing. But one of the things that she does is really counter a common message that we hear, which is that Gen Z is, not able to cope well, that they're all these negative connotations sometimes with young adults from older generations. And this is not really uncommon, but with regard to Gen Z particularly, Dr. Maddox counters that because she has studied this generation and says it's amazing that this group is even standing because of all the challenges they have faced their entire life from, tragedies like school shootings, which Gen X and even for a lot of older millennials, that was like not a thing. That was not something that happened commonly. Whereas today, a lot of kids who are in, public schools or even a lot of private schools are dealing with active shooter drills as a matter of course and thinking that that's normal and that that's just what you do at school. That induces a lot of anxiety. There's also things like a global pandemic that interrupted a lot of young people's education, where depending on where you lived specifically, you may have been shut off from your circle of friends and schoolmates and activities for a year or more. There are things like social media, which we've talked about a lot on the Know Why podcast, and just the technology boom that allows people to be hyper connected all the time, even though it's not feeding our deepest needs for true connection, the kind of connection we really need, but it is feeding and exacerbating our anxiety. So all of these things that are extremely, real and difficult and unique challenges that Gen Z has faced their entire life. And so, yeah, they've kind of developed this method of coping that involves a lot of humor, a lot of just kind of rolling with it and saying, well, okay, this is happening. How can we at least laugh about it and maybe distract ourselves a little bit. So on the one hand, it's kind of entertaining. And if you are a young adult, then you get that. But here's another thing that the article mentions beneath the post, these talking about these videos that are kind of, making dark humor out of the situation happening in the Middle East right now, is a very real need to deal with stress about scary news. So we know that anxiety is already hitting record levels for young adults today. And this kind of dark humor, again, it may distract us, but it doesn't really address what's happening deep down. And so I want to talk about that because whether we're heading into World War III or not, there is always going to be something either out there in the world that's happening in our nation or globally or in our personal lives that we can stress out over. There's always going to be hard stuff to deal with, always going to be unexpected events. So, where does that leave us? Last week, I talked about how Gen Z is actually returning to religion. And so, if that's you, or maybe you are one of the people that's kind of exploring religious connection or trying to get more in touch with that spiritual side, let's look at some ancient religious wisdom regarding how to deal with anxiety. Okay. So I kind of have like a few principles that are rooted in Christian scriptures, but I think apply to what we're seeing today and actually are repeated in a lot of advice from mental health professionals that we see today. So there's a few principles that I want to talk about that I think can help us cope beneath the surface level of just kind of the dark humor and the sarcasm and all of that, which is fine. I'm not saying that that's necessarily bad, but there's a deeper level that we need to address with regard to what's happening around us and making sure that we can find inner peace in a chaotic world. Okay. So, principle number one, we're not omniscient. Okay. That means we're not all knowing, and we shouldn't pretend to be. Regardless of your religious beliefs, I think we can all agree that humans were never designed to know everything that's happening everywhere. The amount of just knowledge that we have about world events is unparalleled with any time in history. Even when we had the internet, it still wasn't the same as when we have smartphones and we have the infinite scroll. So we can literally, within the span of just a few minutes, scroll through and see more headlines than up until, maybe a couple of decades ago, people would read in an entire day or maybe even week. Because if they were getting the news by maybe, watching a nightly local news program or listening to like a traditional radio program or reading the newspaper every day, they were not getting hit with the amount of just news and headlines and breaking news updates that we receive within the matter of a few minutes with a quick scroll on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter/X. Plus, our phones, because again, we know from the way that they're designed, they want to constantly pull us into engagement with these devices, but they're sending us notifications, breaking news, breaking news, breaking news. You have to actually make a decision to turn those off. So, all that to say, we, for the first time in human history, are knowing way more than we were ever meant to know. And it's just, I think it's important for us to acknowledge that we don't have the capacity to handle that influx of information, and it's not healthy. We don't need to. And I think letting go of the fact that recognizing that we don't have that capacity, we weren't designed for that, and then letting go of maybe for some of us this kind of guilt that we need to know everything. And I think that for some people, and I don't have research to back this particular inkling up, it's just something that I kind of feel or resonate with. So maybe it resonates with you too. I think for some millennials and Gen Z, we received well-meaning messages as kids that set us up for some unrealistic expectations of our personal individual capabilities. For instance, telling us that we would change the world, follow your dreams. You can do big things. And so when you are a kid and you are maybe an empathetic person and you do want to do a lot of good in the world, you can kind of be set up for an unrealistic expectation that you will change the world. But in reality, how much is one person in Texas or California or Illinois going to actually change about the situation in Israel or Gaza or Iran or China or even across the country, unless you are in, some very specific roles like president or other national roles. Okay. For the majority of people, we are very limited on what we can actually affect. So that's principle number one, just acknowledging that we weren't designed to know everything. There's only one person, if you want to have a biblical worldview, that actually knows everything and sees everything that's happening all at once. And that's God. And he's the one who created us. So I think we need to think about how God created us with intention and think about where we were placed in the world. And that leads to principle number two, which is focusing on your locus of control. This is something that a lot of you will probably have heard before because it's something that mental health experts will point to. For instance, instead of worrying about everything that's happening out there or in the future or in the past, things outside of our control, focus on the things that are within our control. And we can get really, really micro with this, which down to like grounding and engaging your senses, which is actually something I'm going to talk about in a minute. But even a little bit broader sense, focus on your immediate circle. And I'm not advocating for sticking your head in the sand because while we're not omniscient and we're not supposed to be, I am a firm believer in being educated and informed about the issues. I went to college to major in journalism. I do a podcast that talks a lot about current events, and even more so in my role as co-host for Point of View Radio Talk Show, where we are educating people about issues. So we don't need to stick our head in the sand and be ignorant, but we should limit our news consumption. There are a few practical ways you can do this and again, every time you set up a limit or a boundary of what you're going to consume, that is a way to acknowledge I am not omniscient. I can't know everything. I'm not supposed to know everything. And for a lot of this stuff, like knowing it isn't really going to make a difference because I can't actually do anything about it. So I'm going to focus on what I should know and how that can be effective. So first, tips for limiting our consumption to kind of narrow down, pare back all the things that we're hearing and focusing on our locus of control. Turn off news notifications. Again, you have that on your phone. If you have any other apps like I do with things like the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times or even Substack on my phone for reading, like while I'm working or if I want to catch up with the news, I can still turn off notifications because I don't want to be notified every time they publish a story. That's just going to draw me in and distract me and not really probably produce anything effective other than more worry in my mind. Okay, so I want to choose when I look at the news. I'm going to turn off my notifications. Maybe take a break on weekends. Okay, you don't really need to know what's happening 24/7. You're not the president. You are not a person that's having to watch the news 24/7. So take a break. Say, this is when I'm going to read the news. I'm going to choose what outlet or read a few different outlets, read these headlines, a little bit more about how to choose what news to read in a minute, but limit the time that you are reading it. Okay. And so this takes me into the next thing. Like most of us can't really be educated deeply about every single issue. We just can't. So I would suggest that you think about, and if you are spiritual, I really recommend praying about what issues you should focus on. Think about what issues resonate with you most. What kind of news are you drawn to? And focus your news consumption on those issues. I like to try personally to read the news broadly, like, read about main stories that are happening, like kind of the main foreign policy story of the week or the main national story of the week. But I have other issues that I really care about and I'm really passionate about and involved in. And those are the stories that I will like actively seek out because I want to know what's happening with those particular issues. And they're usually issues that I'm actually doing something about as well. So for me, those are issues like the pro-life issue, things having to do with women, with families getting the support and the resource that they need, with protecting life, anything that has to do with that. I want to read about it. And I've actually volunteered in ministries with regard to that. So I'm going to talk about that in a second as well. But that's something that's like really practical for me to know a lot about. Other things that I'm particularly interested in now are things like tech developments and social media and AI. As you know, from following the No I podcast and the recent series that we've done. And part of that is because I'm a mom. I've been a teacher in the past. I have kids right now, and I'm, looking to the future and potentially going back into the classroom as a teacher at some point down the road. So I really want to know how AI is affecting these kinds of things and how it's affecting kids' brains and how it's affecting the ways that we learn. So those are some examples of issues that I'm really interested in and that I can actually do something about in my work or in my volunteering. And so it makes sense for me to focus on consuming news about those things rather than just every, random story that comes my way. So think about what issues you want to focus on being educated on, and you can kind of limit your news consumption around those things. So let's also briefly talk about localism. We did an interview on this in our Know About Political Engagement series. It was with Dr. Mark Mitchell, who is a former professor of mine. So you can find that episode if you go to knowipodcast.com and search localism. But if you think about it, when most of us scroll on our social media apps or we get news notifications on our phone, it revolves around whatever is the biggest national or global news story at that moment. And again, it can change moment by moment. It's not even a daily news cycle anymore. It's like a minute by minute news cycle. So we're seeing national news or global news. But that stuff, while it does matter, it's almost always true that there is somebody in need right here in our own town or even our own neighborhood. There is some issue that needs to be addressed right where we are, and we have way more of a chance of doing something about that local need than we do about this global or national headline that all of a sudden is now distracting us and giving us more anxiety. So if you feel driven to activism, as many young adults do, and I think that's a great thing, why not look for ways that you can make a difference in your own community? And some ways you can do this are addressing the very basic needs. This is actually a biblical principle as well of people aren't going to listen to what you have to say about your beliefs or your faith or your ideology if they're hungry. And God told us to take care of the poor, to feed the hungry, to house the homeless. He said, "You didn't feed me when I was hungry. You didn't visit me when I was in prison. You didn't give me a place to stay when I was homeless." And this is a story in the New Testament where his disciples say, "When were you hungry? Or when were you in prison? When were you homeless? When were you naked and we didn't clothe you?" And he says, "Whatever you do to the least of these, you have done for me." So that's a real basic, but very important and tangible need that we can meet for a lot of people right in our own towns. So, for instance, can you donate when you do your grocery shopping on a weekly basis? Get some extra groceries and donate them to a local food bank in your town. A lot of cities have them, or a lot of churches have food pantry ministries that you can donate to. Or is there a ministry like that or a soup kitchen that potentially you could like volunteer with? Other ways that you may think about getting involved locally, a lot of city governments will have like a citizens or residents educational program where you can do a little mini academy and take classes to learn about how your city government functions and what the needs of your community are so that you can actually get more involved at a local level and make real changes that affect the daily lives of people living around you. So there are so many ways that you can get involved in a local level, whether you live in a big city or a small town or a rural area. Just think about the needs of people around you and look for an organization that is meeting those needs and how you can get involved. If more people really prioritized being there for the people in their local circles, their family, their friends, their neighbors, in meaningful ways, then I think I know we would see more healthy communities everywhere. And those branch out, right? Those grow into healthy regions, healthy states, healthy nations. And so if you think about it, it's actually kind of a distraction, to be so consumed with what's happening everywhere in the world that we're consumed with worry and fear and anxiety, so that we're paralyzed about doing anything about the needs right here, right around us. And then you have local breakdown because people aren't getting their needs met by the people around them who actually have the means to meet those needs. And so, again, if you go back to how we're not omniscient, acknowledging that can actually be a way, again, if you're spiritual, to defeat the spiritual enemy, to defeat dark spiritual forces that want you to stay distracted, because then you're actually not going to be effective. You can be so much more effective for people and make a difference in real ways by focusing locally. But even if you do want to take action on a national or maybe foreign policy related issue, you can still do that, but you can do that in effective ways. You can call your congressional representative. You can donate to a vetted organization. Just a quick note on that: really research the organization, like if it's a global relief fund or something like that. Because unfortunately, a lot of big nonprofits do take advantage of people's donations. And a lot of times the money that they donate doesn't even reach the particular issue that they were trying to help in the first place. So it's just something to be aware of and be really careful about. And another reason why donating locally to smaller nonprofits and organizations that are like meeting local community needs is a better way to have a bigger impact, because those kinds of organizations usually aren't receiving a lot of donations. And so you know that whatever you give is going to actually go directly to the work that needs to be done. But you can still affect change on those issues, but you can make a bigger impact if you do so intentionally and strategically, while I think focusing on, again, your locus of control. What is around you that you can actually make a difference in? So, principle number 3, focus on the here and now. Don't worry about the future. And as somebody recently pointed out to me, don't worry about the past either. But again, this is a matter of surrender. It's an acknowledgement from a Christian perspective of realizing that God is in control. He's the one that's all knowing. He's the one that's all powerful. I'm not. And I have to let go. Nobody is going to add any time to their life by worrying about what's going to happen. And that's a Bible verse, okay? That's some of that ancient wisdom we were talking about. That comes straight from Jesus. But grounding yourself in the present moment is a powerful tool when you are feeling anxiety. And so you've probably heard of this from maybe a therapist or a doctor or a mental health resource. And a lot of this can include, and when you're starting to feel anxious, focusing on your senses. What can you touch around you? What can you see and feel around you? Focus on your breathing. Go outside, connect with nature right now. This can help bring us out of the abstract or the future, these questions and issues and problems that are causing us to have anxiety, and help us focus on the present. And what's interesting again is this is actually something that Jesus talks about in scripture. Don't worry about tomorrow. Every day has enough worries of its own, but trust that God is going to provide what you need that next day, and focus on right now. And that doesn't mean that we just have to be helpless, but when we focus on the present and we kind of ground ourselves like that, it actually helps us to be empowered, because we can say, what is a need that I can meet right now? Maybe I have a need, and maybe I can't be effective for anybody else if I don't take care of a need I have, like, you know, getting a handle on my mental health, maybe getting some rest that I need, or maybe there is a need in my family or a close friend or in town. And I can think, I can do that. I can meet that need. I can go and I can do a volunteer shift at the food pantry. I can go and buy some groceries and make a donation. I can reach out to somebody who I know needs help, maybe a single mom, and I can offer to babysit their kids. I can go to a city council meeting that's in my town A lot of them are even virtual nowadays. I can go vote in a local election where oftentimes, like, hardly anybody votes, so your vote really carries a lot of weight, and you can make a difference, for, like, a big issue in your town that a lot of people might not know about. Like, there are a lot of things if you ground yourself in the present and stop worrying about what's super far away, either in time or in location, and think, "What's going on right here around me?" Then you can stop feeling anxious and you can actually be effective and do something about it. Um, and again, that is wisdom that comes from scripture and that has been verified over and over by brain science and mental health research and what we've learned about how humans thrive best. So another principle, check your definition of safety. So, if you are religious or curious about religion, like we were talking about in last week's episode, maybe you find a sense of peace from praying or attending church. And that's all great. But I just need to tell you, God does not promise an externally peaceful existence to his followers. In fact, in the Bible, Jesus says you will have trouble. Okay, so there are all these verses about don't worry, trust God, don't be anxious, but pray and God will provide for all of your needs. These cute verses, and we see them printed on coffee mugs and Bible covers and, you know, these flowery images on Instagram and all of that. And it seems like a really nice sentiment. But these sentiments were written at a time when Christians were being tortured, when they were being persecuted and killed for believing in Jesus. This is a time where many of these sentiments were literally written from jail by people like Paul who followed Jesus and were constantly persecuted for their faith and continued to encourage other Christians by writing to them from prison. And still, these early believers found peace that surpasses all understanding. So there's another popular Bible verse. If you ever went to vacation Bible school or were in church at all, you've probably heard, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. But that's not about the prosperity gospel. That's not about I can try hard and get whatever I want in life. In the context, Paul was talking about everything that had happened to him in his pursuit of Christ. He was shipwrecked. He was beaten. He was stoned. He was whipped. He was persecuted. He was put in prison multiple times. All these things today that we would say are trauma and were, but he was saying he can survive and experience God's peace through Jesus Christ, even in all of that. That is the power of God. That's the power of walking with Jesus. And honestly, I think that is a much more relevant message today than a message that if we say enough prayers or do the right things or follow Jesus, that we're going to have like a happy #blessed life. Okay. I think that the real message resonates much deeper and more powerfully than any false promise of superficial peace could resonate. Jesus literally said that you will have trouble. In this world, you will have trouble. And I think people are smart enough and experienced enough, especially our generations, okay, and Gen Z, to know that that's true. But here's the other thing Jesus says, I have overcome the world. Okay, you will have trouble in this world, but don't be afraid. I have overcome the world. So Jesus doesn't call us to be safe in a way that we might traditionally consider to be safe. He calls us to walk with him, to go where he leads, even if it seems dangerous, even if it seems hard or scary, because that's where he will be to catch us and carry us if we fall. So again, it's not about blissful ignorance. It's not about tuning out or trying to max out our productivity and our efforts to try to make a difference and feel like we're doing something. It's about knowing our limits and accepting that, refusing to worry because we know that worry isn't going to do anything, acting to do what we can for the people we can around us where we can, but not acting out of fear or anxiety or some unrealistic expectation that we're actually going to change the world, but from a place of trust, of love for other people, and intentionality. It's not about hiding away, but walking in the path that God has called us to walk, even if it's a dangerous path, knowing that Jesus is with us when we are with him. That is the walk that Christians are called to. And that is, I think, how we realistically cope with all the crazy stuff that we're hearing in the world, okay? There's challenges that humanity hasn't faced before because time marches on, right? But the reality is humanity has always faced crises. Christians in particular have always faced turmoil, but God has always been there. And he promises to continue to be there with us. And even when the world is exploding metaphorically or literally around us, we can have peace in him. And so I encourage you in that. I encourage you to, laugh at whatever reels you need to laugh at, but work on the things we talked about, like really coping on a deeper level with the uncertainty around the world and getting that peace, getting that sense of truly knowing what it's like to be okay inside, even when things are not okay on the outside. And I want to encourage you to listen to a few other episodes that specifically deal with the topics of anxiety. And so the first one is one that I've already mentioned. It was most recent earlier this year in our Know Why God is Good series. And that was an interview with Dr. Tanita Maddox on how can I feel safe in an unstable world. We also had an interview with Lauren McAfee, who is an author and just an amazing person. And that was in our Know About Jesus series. And that episode is called, What Did Jesus Say About Overcoming Anxiety? If anybody has dealt with hardship and obstacles in life, it is Lauren, but she tells her story and talks about how she has dealt with all of those hardships and traumas and conquered anxiety, and also draws on mental health experts in her story. And so that's a great interview. And another person that we've interviewed on the podcast is Bennett with the Resolution Movement. So if you look up Ben Bennett at knowwhypodcast.com or wherever you get the podcast, we've done actually a couple interviews with him, but one specifically focusing on how we can overcome anxiety and depression. And again, that's something that he has intimate experience with and overcoming it. And he talks about how you can use scientific tools and understand things like neuroplasticity that actually help you form new habits and overcome those mental health struggles. And again, it points back to things that were taught in scripture. It's so cool. So anyway, I'll link those resources in case you don't remember them. You can just click on the show notes and go find those episodes to listen to. And I encourage you to do that. I'll see you next week on the Know Why podcast.